Remember I told you how like one of my things that I didn't like about myself was how you start to get defensive with your inbox when so many people are like messaging and you don't know who to respond to, and every time you respond someone asks another question, and a lot of times the questions that they're asking are not even really all that relevant, so like your answer's not even going to help them and you can sense it. And then I said, like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be that guy who like stops responding altogether to random people who are reaching out. And so I was basically just like, it was that point where I told you I was like really making that transition from framing it as Q&A to like genuinely becoming curious as to how this person is seeing something the way that they're seeing it, so that you can make a connection that could potentially help 10 or 100 more people who have that same problem. So I started looking at it that way, and then around that same time I answered this message from this one guy who has kept hitting me up. Every single time I answer, he'll send me another question, and it's been going on for probably like 2 weeks now. And it's funny because the message that he most recently sent me, I mean, we're having like good convo. He seems smart and like humble and taking a lot of things that we're talking about and seems to be like applying them, and then he'll come back and he'll be like, okay, this is my next question, I applied this stuff. And so he sends me this question the other day. I had a small bout with some self-worth issues when I thought I was wasting your time by reaching out. But I'm convincing myself that I'm okay with that thought because, quote, maybe Nick is only reading my rants while he's taking a shit. I said, strong reframe. So my new thing is sort of like, I'm gonna experiment with never being the one to exit a conversation. Like, unless something really inappropriate is going on where the person's just being like flat out rude or abusive, I want to enter every single conversation with every viewer, every user, every member, every student with the intention that we're going to stay here until you end the conversation. Otherwise, I'm completely available to every next question that you have to answer. And what I like about it is, you don't realize, maybe you don't have this going on in you, but like for me it was funny to realize how much I'm monitoring on a subtle level. Like, when does this conversation end? Like when you're in a conversation, when time becomes your only asset, when you're like a CEO or just busy in general, you're constantly in the back of your mind like looking for an exit from every conversation that you're in. Not because necessarily you're uninterested, but just because like time is pressing on you and you're like, okay, so this I only have 30 minutes for, or I only have an hour for.
Right.
And so that's always sort of just in the back of your mind, and I don't like that. It's one of the things I didn't like to see was becoming a part of like my routine. Like, it was when you look back on who you were before you're like CEO entrepreneur and who you were when you were just like a raw performer reaching out and helping people, you never like to see that you're becoming polluted by the industry or the job or whatever. So I set this sort of intention that like I'm not going to be the one to exit anymore, and I almost hope it gets like awkward. I almost want it to be like awkward for people that I'm just not going to leave the conversation. So if you want to keep asking questions, we're going to stay here. But the cool thing about it is if people want to actually ask real questions, I think every conversation goes really fucking deep under that frame. And the twist that I was putting on it, that I was telling you about it in Spain, is just like, it's the difference between feeling obligated to answer questions and becoming genuinely curious how someone is arriving at a certain point of view, a certain argument, how they're seeing a certain concept. And I don't know where I ever lost touch with this because I had no reason to. A lot of the biggest opportunities that I've ever had came from listening and networking with viewers when I didn't have any expectation for what was going to come from it. I was telling Nate the other day, actually, the story about what happened with the creation of the Night Vision expansion pack. Basically, when I put out PO Unlocked, which was probably sometime in 2016, I put it out with an unlimited Q&A as sort of just a perk on top of it. I did private Skype groups for the members, which was really cool, and people seemed to really like that. And then with that, I did unlimited Q&A, knowing that some people will use the Q&A and some people won't. Meaning you can hit me up with any question on the pack and I'll go into it with you. And so, as expected, I think at launch we did like maybe 50 members bought that pack at launch. And most people never even ask a single question privately. Some people will ask a few questions. I had this one guy who had hit me up before he even bought the pack. He wanted to let me know that his situation was pretty strapped financially, so he eventually buys pack 1. After he buys pack 1, asks me a bunch of questions, pretty much a daily thing, then he upgrades to pack 2. Guy continues to email me every day for probably 2 months, back and forth, but his questions keep getting smarter. He's using the program to generate better and better independent methodology, and then he's asking me certain things that are going pretty deep, like even pressing the limits of what I knew about how to use PO at the time. And so it reached a point where I was actually starting to learn a lot from this guy. The relationship became pretty mutually beneficial. And I don't know if he sensed this. I don't know if he knew that a lot of what he was doing was almost penetrating into new territory. But long story short, this guy ended up becoming the lead engineer on the Night Vision pack, the next pack that we put out, which ended up being a $250,000 pack in revenue. So just by having an open policy for Q&A, I sort of fell into a situation where I was able to train someone without even knowing to become the lead engineer on a pack that ended up being like what is now one of our flagship packs. So it's just strange that like you always hear about stuff where it's like, yeah, that it comes back around, but to actually be in an industry long enough offering value to the point where you can start to see examples of that start to happen, and this was like a big one. I mean, you know Steve, he's still with us now, and like he's been close to the vest with Detox ever since then, and it's just been like, it's been interesting to see how a lot of the biggest opportunities that you have on a business level come from network relations that begin in ways that you never expect them to blossom like that. I think his profile is actually kind of important too. Check raise stat would be cool to look at from the flop. Like all these things probably are better proxies than guessing at how he interprets the ace. What was his timing?
Not a 10-second river tank. Pretty fast flop check raise. Pretty fast turn check.
Did you factor that in on a lot of hands?
The timing?
Yeah.
That's kind of like the
Depends
joke
who you
right
ask.
now.
Because it's different online, obviously, than live, right?
Yeah, but there's actually been programs that try to quantify timing tells online.
I feel like it's super important.
I mean,
Me too.
Like,
it is if you can get data on it, but
but the problem is you don't know if somebody's like just looking away, like, yeah, give me some fucking food. Like,
I mean,
waiting, like,
there's a lot of
doing anything.
variables, and the biggest problem, like Nick was saying, is that we don't actually have the data for it. So like we know that it maybe exists, but we don't have it yet. So it's maybe dangerous territory to go making decisions based off of timing alone.
if you had the
know what they're
data,
doing on the other side.
yeah, but if you had the data, it wouldn't matter if they're answering a door or high-fiving their cat. It's accounted for already in the variance of the data. Like if you had 1 million trials of someone using a 6-second timing, it no longer matters whether or not they sometimes are just distracted.
Doesn't it make a difference in the thought process if they're doing one thing rather than the other?
Yeah, but the point is that if you have 1 million trials, some of those trials can be tainted by whatever they're randomly distracted by, and you should still act in a certain way. Quarter?
I don't know. I just looked up once, and for a second I saw you were doing like this machine, like with the weight.
Yeah.
And she was like next to you, and I just saw her like look at you and like giggle or something.
Yeah, she was yelling at me for dropping the weight on the ground, the rubber weight on the tile ground.
Really?
Yeah. She didn't even work there or anything, I don't think. That was bothering her. I didn't even drop it that hard. And the thing that went through my mind is, these people are soft. I just jumped into the Night Vision Skype group, took some Q&A. First question that popped up was from a member who has implemented the course content. Started off with a rough start, and then things got better. He's winning now, and his question is, how can I give myself the permission to feel confident? He says he's still afraid that he is running good and that this isn't actually the result of him actually getting better. This is sort of an interesting mindset situation. I don't know that I've heard this one before. So basically he's winning, playing a different strategy, and he's worried that he's just running well. So my first question to him was sort of, if you've truly been studying and implementing the new data that you've been studying, why would you be surprised to start winning? Usually when people are worried that they're running well, it's more of the product of them not having changed anything significant, knowing that they're still implementing the old strategy and sort of feeling guilty that they're winning because they know they haven't been studying. So I asked him 2 questions off the bat. I said, what's the sample size? And also, why would you worry that you're just running good when you've actually been working really hard on your game? We'll see what he says. But I wanted to bring this back to what I was talking to you about in the kitchen earlier today, where we mentioned that the most important thing that you can be in touch with on the independent learning upward spiral is how it feels every day when you're studying. It's almost like that is the most valuable metric for self-trust. Even more than results, I would say, is how do your study sessions feel? Because I remember personally when I got out of that rock bottom experience where I was massively over applying theory, hitting burnout with a super complicated approach that felt like shit every day when you approach your study sessions, just knowing that you're overwhelming yourself and then having to go play a session even more overwhelmed. There's a certain feeling behind that. Your inward world is a nightmare, basically. And what changes when you start to pick up an approach that's more practical is that suddenly your study sessions feel progressive in some sort of way. You feel more calm. You feel like you have some sort of traction developing around the work that you're doing on any given day, to the point where you start to believe that there was a win rate upgrade in every single study session. It might not necessarily show up in the performance session that day unless those spots come up, because sometimes you're studying unique zones. But over the course of a week, you should very clearly have specific spots that pop up in performance where you can draw back and be like, oh, that's an upgrade that I remember from like very recently that I had in my studies. And you start to see in real time how your efficient study process is translating into real win rate. I remember those occurrences. I remember that progress, the feeling behind that being the most transformative thing on the road from small stakes to high stakes, for sure. So this is really interesting. I ask him, why are you surprised to be winning? And he says, I'm not surprised to be winning. I'm surprised that I'm feeling like this. He doesn't seem to see that they're the same thing. Like, he doesn't seem to see that if you actually believed that you upgraded your system and should be a winner now, that you wouldn't feel surprised once you were winning. he must still think that they're like independent things. So we'll see how deep he's willing to go with us here, because at this point, like, the danger is that you're about to push somebody's buttons who might not be available to the upgrade. Because what I'm about to do right now is probe him in a very uncomfortable place by basically saying, you're clearly lying to yourself in a way that you might not be aware of here. I'm going to phrase it in a way that's a little more delicate. But he seems to be avoiding something at the core of what's going on, because there's a clear contradiction in what he's saying. The question that I asked him to clarify is, what would need to happen before you actually were able to accept that you were a true winner? Because this is an interesting thing that we haven't really seen yet, that most of the time when you get involved in a discussion like this, the person will say that the thing that needs to happen is that they have to start winning. And this guy's actually saying, even winning isn't enough for me to trust that I'm actually a winner, even after studying. Which is kind of scary, because it's likely indicating that there is some sort of really, really deep subconscious belief in unworthiness that's active, that is almost denying the reality of the situation. See what he says. So he says, I need to win more. He says, I would need to win $100,000 using the course strategy. I can't really justify why I'm choosing that number in my head. It just feels like it would be enough. So I think that's reasonable. I mean, yeah, it's arbitrary. But if you have a number in your head that hasn't been met yet, which would confirm that you are now worthy of categorizing yourself as a winner, that would explain why you don't feel that way if you haven't won enough yet. I still think it's kind of a dangerous paradigm to be in, because now we get into the slippery slope of having to have prerequisites before you feel worthy, which usually leads on this self-fulfilling prophecy of remaining unworthy indefinitely. So it's pretty dangerous to say, I'm going to have to win 100,000 before I can feel like a true winner. And until then, I'll feel self-doubt, because that self-doubt is inevitably going to creep into performance, creating performance stress and performance tilt. And now you have a situation where your belief system doesn't allow you to access your A game until you get to your 100,000 profit goal, except it's going to be way harder for you to actually get there if you're not able to play your A game along the way. So the solution is to drop the whole belief system, because it generates way too much friction on the path to the arbitrary goal. But this is one of the most difficult things to pull out by the root in terms of mindset traps. Is almost all of us are dealing with some sort of unworthiness belief when we break it right down to the core. It comes in different flavors and different variations and different intensities, but far and away the belief in unworthiness is what stops the player from embodying the A game on the path to success or results or worthiness in their mind. So the entire mindset journey is sort of about how to hack the belief of being at the end or the solution, how to play from that feeling of already being there before you're actually there. One way to do it, people would say, is fake it till you make it. I don't really think that works. I think it can have its advantages if you're pumping volume and you're technically sound enough that you actually just are a winner. Because then what's happening is you're winning at a win rate that's giving you more confidence as you go, and then sort of what happens is you slip into your own reality of being a winner. So you're gaining confidence through leveraging results. But to start from a place of saying, I'm not good enough yet until I approach this arbitrary goal and then I can access my A game, usually what that's going to do is reinforce a core belief in unworthiness, generating a suffocating amount of performance tilt. So truly elegant mindset work is about finding a way to pull the belief out by the root so that you can operate on the path to the goal without believing that you're not there yet. inwardly. It's all about the inward experience, which is where it goes back to what we were saying about that feeling that you get when you're studying in a really efficient way. It's the feeling that creates the reality that allows you to put your A game on the table every time you sit down. And that A game is actually what manifests the 100,000 hand goal. At the end of the day, it comes down to moments in time, moments in performance.